Commander Sarah Chan watched through the viewport as Earth grew smaller behind them, a blue marble suspended in the infinite black. Around her, the bridge of the Exodus ship New Dawn hummed with quiet desperation. 500 years of human civilization, reduced to a fleet of refugee vessels fleeing into the unknown. The Galactic Council had been thorough in their banishment. Every human colony world had been blockaded, every trade route severed, every ally turned away by threats and economic pressure. The message was clear: humanity was no longer welcome among civilized species. Long-range sensors are picking up Council patrol ships on the outer perimeter, reported Lieutenant Torres from a station. They're making sure we actually leave. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Galactic Council consisted of 12 advanced species who had dominated this region of space for over 10,000 years. They had welcomed humanity initially, eager to exploit human creativity and resourcefulness. But when humanity's rapid expansion and military capabilities began to make them nervous, the Council had acted swiftly and decisively. The official reason for the banishment was humanity's excessive aggression and inability to conform to civilized standards of conduct. The real reason was simpler: fear. In less than 2 centuries since first contact, humans had gone from primitive spaceflight to challenging the established order. They had colonized faster, adapted quicker, and fought more fiercely than any species the Council had encountered. "Sir," came another voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Council flagship." Sarah nodded grimly. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of High Chancellor Vextar, leader of the Kythera Empire and current head of the Galactic Council. His 6 eyes fixed on Sarah with cold satisfaction, his chitinous features arranged in what might have been a smile on a more pleasant creature. "Commander Chun," his voice carried the universal translator's mechanical tone. "I trust you understand the gravity of this moment. Humanity has been given a chance at redemption through exile. Do not make the mistake of attempting to return. The galaxy has no place for your kind." Sarah stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back in a pose of military bearing that had become second nature during her years fighting the Council's wars. "High Chancellor, you're making a mistake. Humanity has contributed more to galactic civilization in 2 centuries than most species manage in millennia. Our scientists, our engineers, our soldiers, your soldiers," Vextar interrupted, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Yes, we remember your soldiers well. Too well. That is precisely why you must go." The screen shifted to show tactical displays of recent conflicts. Human troops storming pirate strongholds that had resisted Council forces for decades. Human ships breaking blockades that had been considered impregnable. Human commanders winning battles against impossible odds through a combination of cunning, courage, and an apparently genetic inability to accept defeat. "Your species possesses a disturbing enthusiasm for violence," Vextar continued. "You do not fight merely to win, you fight to annihilate. You do not negotiate, you demand. You do not adapt, you conquer. The galaxy requires order, stability, predictability. Humanity represents chaos." Sarah felt the anger rising in her chest, but forced her voice to remain level. "We've honored every treaty, followed every law, to the letter perhaps, but not to the spirit." Vextar's image leaned forward. "Tell me, Commander, in your deepest thoughts, do you truly believe humanity should answer to the Council? Do you not dream of the day when human ships patrol these lanes, when human law governs these worlds?" Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped, because he was right. Every human she knew harbored those exact thoughts, not out of malice, but out of a fundamental belief that they could do better, that their way was superior. It was what had made them such effective allies, and such dangerous ones. "I thought so," Vextar said, reading her hesitation correctly. "This is not cruelty, Commander. This is necessity. The galaxy cannot accommodate a species that believes itself destined to rule it." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Sarah stared at the blank screen for a long moment before turning to her crew. "Navigation, what's our status on the jump coordinates?" "Ready when you are, sir. We'll be following the agreed route to the galactic rim." "Communications, send word to the fleet. We maintain formation until we're beyond the Council's sensor range." As orders were acknowledged, and the great human exodus continued, Sarah found herself thinking about Vextar's words. The Council feared humanity's ambition, their refusal to accept limits, their tendency to push boundaries until they broke. But what the Council didn't understand was that these traits weren't flaws to be corrected. They were features that had allowed humanity to survive ice ages, world wars, and the vast emptiness between stars. Hours passed as the human fleet moved through space, leaving behind everything they had built among the stars. Sarah walked the corridors of the new dawn, observing her people. Scientists salvaging what equipment they could carry. Soldiers maintaining their weapons despite having nowhere to use them. Children born on distant worlds, now facing an uncertain future. But what struck her most was the absence of despair. There was anger, yes, and frustration, but not defeat. In the eyes of her crew, in the set of their shoulders, in the way they went about their duties, Sarah saw something that made her smile despite everything. They hadn't broken. 500 years of expansion and growth ended by political maneuvering and superior numbers, and humanity still hadn't broken. "Commander," Lieutenant Torres called out. "We're approaching the designated exit point. Council ships are maintaining their distance." "Good. Signal the fleet to prepare for final jump." Sarah returned to her command chair and activated the ship-wide communication system. Throughout the vessel, and throughout the hundreds of ships that made up humanity's exodus, her voice carried to every man, woman, and child. "This is Commander Chun speaking to all vessels of the human fleet. Today we leave behind the worlds we built, the homes we made, the lives we planned. The Council believes they have seen the last of us. They believe they have solved their human problem by pushing us into the dark. They're wrong. We are not the first species to face exile. We are not the first to be cast out by those who fear what we might become. But we are the first to be exiled not for our weaknesses, but for our strengths. They fear our potential, our refusal to accept limits, our stubborn belief that tomorrow can be better than today. The galaxy thinks it knows what humanity is capable of. They've seen us fight their wars, solve their problems, push their boundaries. But they've only seen what we can do when we're playing by their rules, confined by their limitations, held back by their fears. They're about to discover what 5 centuries of freedom can teach us." Through the viewport, Sarah could see the shimmer of hyperspace fields activating throughout the fleet. One by one, the great ships that carried humanity's survivors began to disappear into the void, heading for empty space beyond the galaxy's edge where no civilized species dared to venture. As the new dawn prepared for its own jump, Sarah's communications officer received a final transmission from the Council fleet. "Human vessels, this is your final warning. Any attempt to return to civilized space will be met with total destruction. You have been judged and found wanting. Do not test our resolve." Sarah smiled coldly as she gave the order to jump. The last thing the Council sensors detected before the human fleet vanished was a brief transmission from a new dawn. Not words, but a simple gesture captured by the ship's external cameras. Commander Sarah Chun, standing at her viewport, raising her middle finger toward the Council fleet. Then, humanity disappeared into the dark, and the galaxy settled back into the comfortable rhythm of civilized existence. The Council congratulated themselves on a problem solved, a threat neutralized, a difficult species properly contained. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. 500 years later, they would learn what happens when you take a species defined by its refusal to accept defeat and give it half a millennium to prove you wrong. The galaxy that had banished humanity for being too dangerous was about to discover what true danger looked like. Because humanity was coming home. And they weren't coming back as refugees. They were coming back as conquerors. Marcus Cole had been born in the void between galaxies, raised on stories of Earth, and the worlds humanity had lost. Now, 50 years after the Exodus, he stood on the observation deck of New Sparta, the largest of humanity's Orcs ships, watching construction crews work on something that would have been impossible to imagine when his grandparents first fled Council space. The void between galaxies was supposed to be empty. The Council's xenobiologists had declared it lifeless, a wasteland of dark matter and cosmic radiation where nothing could survive, let alone thrive. They had been wrong about that, just as they had been wrong about so many things concerning humanity. "Another convoy arrived yesterday," said Dr. Elena Vasquez, joining Marcus at the viewport. She was the head of the Adaptation Project, one of the most classified programs in humanity's new civilization. 7 ships from the Kepler expedition. They found 3 more worlds. Marcus nodded, his enhanced vision automatically adjusting to track the distant sparkle of ships moving between the mobile cities that now comprise humanity's domain. Habitable. After modification, yes. The terraforming crews estimate 18 months to make them livable. Elena's voice carried a mixture of pride and something darker. The cost in human life will be significant. That was the reality of their new existence. The void between galaxies wasn't empty. It contained rogue planets, failed stars, and, most importantly, things that the Council species had never encountered because they lacked the courage to venture this far from home. Humanity had discovered creatures that fed on radiation, microorganisms that could break down matter at the molecular level, and energy beings that existed in the quantum foam between dimensions. Each discovery had cost lives. But each discovery had also taught them something new about survival, about adaptation, about pushing beyond the limits of what was considered possible. The enhancement procedures are ready for the next group, Elena continued, her tone carefully neutral. It was a topic that still divided humanity's leadership. We have 40 volunteers for the neural interface trials and 60 for the genetic optimization program. Marcus turned from the viewport to study his friend's face. Elena was one of the original exiles, old enough to remember Earth's blue skies and the taste of rain. Like most of the first generation, she struggled with what humanity was becoming. Still having doubts? Marcus asked. Every day, Elena's honesty was refreshing in a leadership structure that increasingly dealt in necessities rather than preferences. When we left council space, we were human. Now, she gestured toward the construction crews working outside. Even at this distance, it was obvious they weren't entirely human anymore. Enhanced muscular systems allowed them to work in zero gravity for hours without fatigue. Modified respiratory systems let them breathe trace atmospheres that would kill unmodified humans. Neural implants gave them instant access to the vast databases humanity had built in exile. Now we're something new, Marcus finished. Something that can survive what the Council couldn't even imagine. The transformation hadn't been planned. In the first decades of exile, humanity had focused simply on survival. They had established colonies on airless rocks, harvested ice from comets, and gradually built the infrastructure needed to support their population in the cosmic void. But survival hadn't been enough. The void between galaxies was home to threats that required more than human reflexes, human strength, human intelligence to overcome. The first breakthrough had come 30 years into the exile, when Dr. Sarah Kim's research team encountered a crystalline entity that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. The entity had killed 12 researchers before the team managed to contain it. But in those final moments, as the creature tried to consume Sarah's mind, she had experienced something unprecedented. For a brief instant, her consciousness had expanded beyond the three-dimensional space humans called reality, and she had seen the universe as the entity did. The knowledge had nearly killed her, but it had also shown humanity a path forward that no council species had ever imagined. The latest batch of Deep Scouts reported back this morning, Marcus said, changing the subject to something more comfortable for both of them. 7 more systems surveyed, 3 suitable for resource extraction. The Deep Scouts were humanity's most extreme adaptation. Volunteers who underwent modifications so extensive they could barely be called human anymore. Enhanced senses that could perceive electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum. Nervous systems rebuilt to process information at superhuman speeds. Bodies redesigned to survive in vacuum, in crushing gravity, in environments that would instantly kill any council species. They ventured into places where normal humans couldn't go, mapping the vast emptiness between galaxies and cataloging the strange phenomena that existed there. Most importantly, they searched for anything that could give humanity an edge when they inevitably returned to face the Council. Marcus, Elena said quietly, "Do you ever wonder if we've gone too far? If the Council was right to fear us?" It was a question that haunted many of the exile leadership. In their drive to survive and adapt, humanity had pushed beyond the boundaries of their original nature. They had embraced genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, and stranger technologies that the void had taught them. The children born in the last 50 years were faster, stronger, and smarter than any human in history. They thought in ways that previous generations couldn't comprehend, seeing patterns and possibilities that would have been invisible to their ancestors. They were undeniably human in their core values and drives, but increasingly alien in their capabilities. The Council didn't fear what we were, Marcus said finally. They feared what we might become. They thought banishing us would prevent that transformation. Instead, they guaranteed it. Through the viewport, they watched a group of modified humans working on the hull of a new ship design. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated, too efficient to be entirely natural. Neural interfaces allowed them to share thoughts and coordinate actions within precision that bordered on telepathy. The ship they were building was unlike anything in Council space. Its hull was grown rather than manufactured, using techniques learned from studying void-dwelling organisms. Its power systems were based on principles that existed only in the quantum foam between dimensions. Its weapons systems could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, turning enemy vessels into clouds of constituent atoms. Elena, Marcus said, "Do you know what the Deep Scouts found in the Magellan Void?" She shook her head. Much of the Deep Scout reports were classified at levels she didn't have access to. Ruins, a civilization that existed between the galaxies millions of years ago. They built structures that span light years, technologies that make the Council's greatest achievements look like stone tools. And, according to the archaeological team, they were wiped out by something from normal space. Something that feared what they were becoming. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the void's cosmic radiation. "You think the Council has done this before? Banished other species?" "I think the Council represents a pattern that repeats throughout the universe. Established powers that fear change, that prefer stagnation to growth, that would rather destroy potential than risk being surpassed." Marcus's voice carried a cold anger that reminded Elena why the younger generation frightened her sometimes. "The difference is that humanity doesn't break easily." A chime sounded through the observation deck, followed by an announcement that made both of them straighten. "All senior staff report to Command Center Alpha. Priority 1 briefing in 30 minutes. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Priority 1 meant one of two things. Either a major crisis threatening human survival or a breakthrough significant enough to change everything. They made their way through New Sparta's corridors, passing through sections that showcased humanity's adaptation to life in the void. Hydroponic gardens that could grow food in zero gravity. Manufacturing centers that used techniques learned from studying crystalline entities. Research laboratories where humans worked alongside artificial intelligences that had achieved consciousness in the digital realm. Command Center Alpha was located at the heart of New Sparta, protected by layers of armor and shielding that could withstand direct hits from antimatter warheads. As Elena and Marcus entered, they found the chamber already filled with humanity's leadership. Fleet Admiral Chun, descendant of the original Exodus commander. Dr. Pavel Novak, head of the Technology Integration Project. Colonel Sarah Martinez, leader of the Special Forces Division that had been trained to fight beings that existed partially outside normal space. But the person who commanded everyone's attention was someone Elena had never expected to see again. Dr. Sarah Kim, the researcher who had first made contact with the crystalline entities, stood at the central display. She looked exactly as she had 50 years ago, apparently untouched by time. Her modifications had gone beyond anything else attempted, transforming her into something that could perceive and interact with higher dimensional space. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Chen began, "Dr. Kim has returned from her extended survey of the cosmic void with information that changes everything we thought we knew about our situation." Sarah Kim's voice, when she spoke, carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions humans couldn't normally perceive. The Council made an error in their historical records. They believe this is the first time they have banished a species to the void. But I found evidence of 17 previous civilizations that were exiled in exactly the same way. The display activated, showing three-dimensional maps of the cosmic void. Points of light marked the ruins of ancient civilizations, each one representing a species that had once threatened the Council's established order. Each civilization was banished for the same reasons: excessive aggression, failure to conform, potential to disrupt the existing order. Each one was expected to die in the void, removed from the galaxy's history as if they had never existed. Elena felt her breath catch. What happened to them? "That," Sarah Kim said with something that might have been a smile, "is where things become interesting." Of the 17 exiled civilizations, 16 did exactly what the Council expected. They either died in the void or transformed into something so alien they were no longer a threat to galactic civilization. And the 17th? Marcus asked. The 17th built ships that could travel between galaxies. They developed technologies that allowed them to manipulate space and time itself. They became something beyond the Council's ability to contain or control. Sarah Kim's eyes glowed with an inner light that spoke of knowledge gained at terrible cost. They went home. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Somewhere in the vast universe, there was a precedent for what humanity was attempting to become. The galaxy's history includes a period called the Great Silence, Sarah continued. 1,500 years when no new species achieved spaceflight, when technological progress stopped, when entire civilizations simply disappeared. The Council's official records claim it was a natural period of stagnation. But it wasn't, Admiral Chun said, understanding immediately. No, it was what happened when the 17th civilization came home. They didn't return as conquerors or as refugees. They returned as judges. They evaluated every species in the galaxy and decided which ones deserved to survive. Elena felt the pieces falling into place. The Council's fear of humanity wasn't just about their aggressive nature or their rapid expansion. It was about a pattern they had seen before, a cycle that repeated throughout galactic history. The Council knows, she whispered. They know what happens when they banish a species to the void. They're not trying to solve a problem. They're trying to prevent humanity from becoming something that could judge them. Sadakim nodded. But they've made the same mistake their predecessors made. They assume that banishment equals death, that exile equals defeat. They don't understand that for some species, being pushed beyond the edge of civilized space isn't an ending. It's an opportunity, Marcus finished. Exactly. And now we have something the 17th civilization didn't have when they began their transformation. We have their knowledge, their mistakes to learn from, their successes to build upon. Admiral Chen stepped forward. What are you proposing, Dr. Kim? I'm proposing that we stop thinking like refugees and start thinking like the civilization that's going to reshape galactic history. The Council gave us 500 years to evolve beyond their ability to contain us. We've been wasting time trying to simply survive when we should have been preparing to return. The display changed, showing new ship designs that seemed to bend space around them, weapon systems that could affect matter in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and technologies that existed at the intersection of science and something that might have been magic. The Deep Scouts have identified 14 passages back to Council space, routes through higher dimensional space that bypass their sensor networks entirely. We have the knowledge to build ships that can travel those routes. We have volunteers willing to undergo the modifications necessary to survive the journey. How many? Admiral Chen asked. 500. 500 individuals transformed beyond anything the Council has ever encountered. Each one capable of operating independently. Each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Each one loyal to humanity's vision of what the galaxy could become. Elena stared at the display, showing the transformed humans who would carry out this mission. They were barely recognizable as the species that had fled Council space 5 centuries ago. Enhanced beyond normal human limits, armed with technologies that bordered on the supernatural, driven by a purpose that had been forged in the cosmic void. When? Marcus asked. Sarah Kim's smile was predatory, carrying the weight of 50 years spent learning the universe's darkest secrets. The 500 volunteers completed their final transformations yesterday. The ships are ready. The routes are mapped. We leave tomorrow. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. Then it's time. Signal all ships. Begin Operation Homecoming. As alarms sounded throughout New Sparta, and the vast machinery of humanity's return was set into motion. Elena watched the displays, showing Earth's last children preparing for a journey that would reshape galactic civilization. The Council had banished humanity 500 years ago, believing they had eliminated a threat to their ordered galaxy. Tomorrow, they would discover what humanity had learned in the darkness between stars. They would discover what happened when you gave a species that refused to accept defeat half a millennium to prove you wrong. Captain Jake Morrison felt the dimensional shift as his ship, the Prometheus, slipped through the quantum barriers that separated the void between galaxies from normal space. After 5 centuries of exile, humanity was coming home. But The being who piloted the Prometheus bore little resemblance to the species that had fled Council space so long ago. Jake's consciousness existed simultaneously across 7 dimensions, allowing him to perceive space-time as a malleable construct rather than an absolute constant. His physical form had been redesigned for survival in environments that would instantly kill any Council species. His memories contained the accumulated knowledge of 50 generations of humans who had refused to accept defeat. He was one of the 500, humanity's answer to the galaxy that had rejected them. Dimensional breach complete, reported Zarachan, his communications officer. Like all of the 500, she had undergone modifications that pushed the boundaries of what could still be called human. Her neural interface allowed her to process information across quantum entangled networks, maintaining contact with all 500 ships simultaneously. All vessels have successfully transitioned to Council space. Passive sensors only, Jay commanded. I want to observe before we announce ourselves. Through the Prometheus' enhanced sensor systems, Jake studied the galaxy humanity had been forced to leave behind. In 500 years, much had changed. New space stations marked trade routes that hadn't existed during the exile. The boundaries of Council space had expanded, incorporating species that had been primitive when humanity left. But some things remained exactly the same. The Kythera still dominated the central systems. The Vorthan Collective still controlled the Outer Rim trade networks. The 12 species of the Galactic Council still maintained their grip on galactic civilization, convinced of their natural right to rule. Sir, Zara said quietly, I'm detecting Council patrol ships along the frontier. Same formation patterns they used 500 years ago. Jake smiled, an expression that on his modified features carried predatory overtones that would have been impossible for his ancestors. The Council had grown comfortable in their supremacy. They had faced no serious challenges to their authority in half a millennium, no threats that required them to adapt or grow. They were about to learn the price of stagnation. Signal the fleet, Jake ordered. Begin Phase 1. Across the 500 ships of humanity's return, systems activated that no Council species had ever imagined. Dimensional manipulators that allowed them to exist partially outside normal space. Quantum weapons that could affect matter across multiple parallel realities simultaneously. Shield systems that drew power from the zero-point energy of vacuum itself. Each ship was a masterpiece of technology developed in the void between galaxies, incorporating principles that the Council's greatest scientists couldn't even theorize. But, more importantly, each ship carried one of the 500 individuals who had been transformed beyond the limits of baseline humanity. The first target was a Kythera patrol ship conducting routine border surveillance near what had once been the human colony of New Geneva. The vessel carried a crew of 43, armed with weapons that represented the pinnacle of Council military technology. It never saw the Prometheus coming. Jake's ship materialized from dimensional space directly above the patrol vessel, moving through higher dimensions to bypass every sensor system the Kythera possessed. The Prometheus' appearance was alien even by the standards of a galaxy filled with diverse species. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Unknown vessel. Identify yourself immediately or face destruction, came a transmission from the Kythera ship. The universal translator carried the arrogant confidence of a species that had never faced a serious threat. Jake opened a channel, allowing his enhanced vocal cords to produce harmonics that existed across multiple frequency ranges simultaneously. When he spoke, his words carried undertones that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal human perception. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Prometheus. We are the descendants of the species you banished 500 years ago. We have returned to reclaim what was taken from us. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds. Long enough for the Kythera commander to process the impossibility of what he was hearing, but not long enough for him to formulate a response. Human, came the reply, and Jake could hear the disbelief in the alien voice. Impossible. The humans were exiled to the void. No species can survive in the space between galaxies. Your species couldn't survive there, Jake corrected. Humanity not only survived, we evolved. We adapted. We became something your Council never imagined possible. The Prometheus' sensors detected the Kythera ship powering weapons systems that would have been formidable threats to the vessel's humanity had possessed 5 centuries ago. Against the technology they had developed in exile, they were less than toys. "You will surrender immediately," the Kythera commander ordered, falling back on the authority his species had wielded unchallenged for millennia. "Your vessel will submit to boarding and inspection. Any resistance will be met with complete destruction." Jake's laugh carried harmonics that seemed to echo from dimensions the Kythera couldn't perceive. "Commander, I want you to understand something very important. Your species spent 500 years believing you had solved the human problem by banishing us to the void. You celebrated our exile as a triumph of civilized order over primitive chaos." The Prometheus began to glow with energies that existed at the intersection of matter and space-time itself. Its hull shifted and flowed, revealing weapon systems that the Kythera sensors couldn't even classify. "You were wrong. What happened next lasted less than a microsecond. The Prometheus' quantum weapons reached across dimensional space and touched the Kythera patrol ship. At the subatomic level, the bonds holding the vessel's hull together simply ceased to exist. The ship didn't explode. It simply dissolved, its matter returning to the quantum foam from which it had originally emerged. 43 Kythera warriors, each one a veteran of countless battles, vanished from existence so completely that the universe itself seemed to forget they had ever been there. Phase 1 complete. Jake reported to the fleet network. First contact protocol successful. Moving to Phase 2. Across the galaxy, similar encounters were taking place as the 500 announced humanity's return. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Council ships encountering vessels that shouldn't exist, crewed by beings that had once been human, but were now something far beyond the Council's ability to comprehend. On the Vorthan trade station of Deep Haven, Captain Maria Santos materialized from dimensional space directly in the command center. Her ship, the Retribution, remained invisible to the station's sensors, existing primarily in higher dimensional space where Vorthan technology couldn't detect it. "Attention station personnel," Maria announced, her voice carrying psychic overtones that made every Vorthan on the station freeze in terror. "You are now under human authority. Comply with our instructions, and you will not be harmed." The station commander, a veteran trader named Gextor, stared at Maria with all 6 of his eyes. Like most Vorthans, he had grown up hearing stories of the extinct human species, tales of warriors so violent they had to be banished from civilized space. But the being standing in his command center bore only superficial resemblance to those stories. Maria's form shifted and flowed like liquid shadow, her presence seeming to exist in spaces that hurt to look at directly. When she moved, reality seemed to bend around her, as if the normal laws of physics were merely suggestions in her vicinity. "You're human," Gextor managed to whisper. "I was human once," Maria replied. 500 years in the void between galaxies taught us to become something more. Your council wanted us gone because they feared what we might become. They should have killed us while they still could." Across the galaxy, the same scene played out 500 times as humanity's representatives announced their return. Not as refugees seeking mercy or justice, but as the inheritors of technologies and capabilities that made the Council's greatest achievements look like children's toys. But the true shock came when the 500 began to coordinate their actions across galactic space instantaneously. Using quantum entanglement networks that operated outside normal spacetime, they shared information and coordinated strategy faster than lightspeed communication could travel. The Council's response was swift and overwhelming. Within 6 hours of the first encounters, every major fleet in Council space was moving toward the reported human sightings. Thousands of warships, representing all 12 Council species, converged on the positions where humanity's representatives had revealed themselves. They found empty space. The 500 had vanished back into dimensional space, leaving behind only the wreckage of the Council ships that had challenged them and populations on thousands of worlds who now knew that humanity had returned. Emergency sessions were called in the Council chambers on Nexus Prime, the capital world of galactic civilization. High Chancellor Vextar, now ancient even by Kythera standards, found himself facing the same nightmare his predecessors had sought to prevent 5 centuries earlier. "The reports are confirmed," announced Admiral Torvek of the Zelanian Defense Force. "The humans have returned. Their technological capabilities exceed our ability to measure. Our best weapons had no effect on their vessels." "How many ships?" Vextar demanded. "Unknown. Our sensors cannot detect them unless they choose to reveal themselves." We estimate 500 vessels based on the number of simultaneous contacts, but they could have 10 times that number hidden in whatever dimensional space they're using. Vextar's mandibles clicked with frustrated rage. In 500 years of peace and prosperity, the Council had grown powerful beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their combined fleets numbered in the millions. Their weapons could crack planets. Their alliance represented the accumulated military might of 12 advanced civilizations. And humanity's return had made all of it meaningless. "What do they want?" asked Counselor Ythera of the Mentari Confederation. "That," said a new voice from the chamber's center, "is an excellent question." Jake Morrison materialized from dimensional space directly in the middle of the council chamber, his enhanced form adapting instantly to the atmosphere and gravity. Around him, 12 of the galaxy's most powerful beings recoiled in shock and terror. "I am Captain Jake Morrison, speaking for the human race," he announced. "We have returned to reclaim our place in this galaxy." Security forces immediately surrounded Jake, weapons trained on him from every direction. He ignored them completely, his attention focused on the council members who had inherited the decision to banish his species. "You have 5 standard days to prepare your response," Jake continued. "We will return to these chambers at that time to discuss the terms of the galaxy's surrender." Surrender? Vextar's voice carried 5 centuries of accumulated authority. "You speak to the Galactic Council. We represent 12 species and billions of worlds. We will never surrender to a handful of exiled humans." Jake's smile was genuinely friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying than any expression of anger would have been. "Chancellor Vextar, you misunderstand the situation. We're not asking you to surrender to us." His form began to fade as he prepared to return to dimensional space. "We're informing you that surrender is the only option we're offering. You cannot threaten the Council." Vextar shouted as Jake's image became translucent. "We have the most powerful military in galactic history." "You have the most powerful military in this galaxy's history," Jake corrected. "But we learned to fight wars in places where your species couldn't even survive. We adapted to threats that would drive your greatest warriors insane. We spent 500 years becoming something that could stand against the dark between stars." Jake's presence was now barely visible, existing more in higher dimensions than in normal space. "Your military was designed to fight species like yourselves, biological entities bound by the limitations of normal space-time. We're no longer constrained by those limitations. What do you want from us?" Counselor Ythera asked desperately. "Justice," Jake replied simply. 500 years ago, you banished humanity because you feared we would challenge your authority. You were right to fear us. But you made a critical error." "What error?" Vextar demanded. "You assumed that banishing us would prevent the challenge you feared. Instead, you gave us 500 years to become worthy of the fear you showed us." Jake's presence vanished completely, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Around the galaxy, similar messages were being delivered to every major government, military force, and population center. Humanity was home, and after 5 centuries of exile in the void between galaxies, they had returned with capabilities that made them the galaxy's new apex species. The Council had 5 days to decide whether they would surrender gracefully or learn firsthand what 500 warriors who had survived the dark between stars were capable of when their patience finally ran out. The war began exactly 72 hours after Jake Morrison's ultimatum expired. High Chancellor Vextar had spent those 3 days mobilizing every ship, every weapon, every alliance the Council could muster. The combined fleets of 12 civilizations moved toward predetermined coordinates, carrying enough firepower to sterilize every world that had ever harbored human life. It wasn't enough. Admiral Sarah Martinez, leader of humanity's military operations, watched the Council fleets gather through sensors that existed across 17 dimensions simultaneously. From her command ship Nemesis, she could perceive the enemy formations as geometric patterns spreading across space-time itself. "They're really going to fight," her tactical officer observed. Commander Lisa Park had been born in the void between galaxies, her consciousness shaped by exposure to cosmic phenomena that would have driven earlier generations of humans insane. All 12 species, unified for the first time in recorded galactic history. "They're scared," Sarah replied. "Scared enough to set aside 10,000 years of political rivalry and territorial disputes. They recognize the existential threat we represent to their entire way of life. Through the quantum communication network, Sarah could sense the other members of the 500 taking their positions throughout Council space. Each one commanded a ship that existed primarily in higher dimensional space, armed with weapons that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. But the real weapon wasn't their technology, it was what 500 years in the void had made them. Each of the 500 had evolved beyond the limitations of baseline humanity, developing capabilities that allowed them to survive in environments where the Council species couldn't even exist. Enemy fleet composition? Sarah asked. 4,736 ships, Lisa reported. Everything from fast attack craft to planetary siege platforms. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding our surrender. Sarah smiled, an expression that carried predatory overtones impossible for her ancestors. Put me through to their command ship. The main screen activated, revealing the bridge of the Council flagship Eternal Dominion. High Chancellor Vextar stood at its center, flanked by the military leaders of all 12 Council species. Behind them, tactical displays showed human positions marked as red contacts, 500 small targets surrounded by the largest military force in galactic history. Admiral Martinez. Vextar's voice carried the accumulated authority of 5 centuries of unchallenged rule. You will surrender immediately or face the consequences of defying galactic civilization. Chancellor, Sarah replied, you still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? You see 500 ships against nearly 5,000, and you think the numbers favor you. The numbers do favor us. Admiral Torvek of the Zelanian Defense Force interjected. Your exile has made you delusional. No species can survive against these odds. Sarah's image flickered as her enhanced form shifted between dimensions, adapting to perceive space-time from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Admiral, your species has never fought a war outside normal space. You've never faced enemies that exist across multiple dimensions. You've never encountered weapons that can affect matter at the quantum level. We have the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. Vextar declared. You have the most advanced technology in this galaxy, Sarah corrected. We learned to fight wars in the space between galaxies, against threats your species couldn't even perceive. We adapted to survive in environments that would instantly kill any Council species. The tactical displays on both ships showed the 2 fleets maneuvering toward each other across the Kepler Nebula, where humanity's first colony world had once orbited a yellow star. The symbolism wasn't lost on either side. This was where humanity's exile had begun and where their return would be decided. Last chance, Vextar warned. Surrender now, and we'll consider exile rather than extermination. Sarah's laugh carried harmonics that seemed to resonate across dimensions the Council species couldn't perceive. Chancellor, do you know what we found in the void between galaxies? Evidence of 17 civilizations that were exiled exactly as we were. 16 of them died in the cold and dark, broken by isolation and despair. The 17th came home. They reshaped galactic civilization according to their vision of what it should be. Your great silence wasn't a period of natural stagnation. It was what happened when a species that had been transformed by exile returned to judge their former oppressors. The Council fleet opened fire first, unleashing concentrated salvos that could have reduced planetary surfaces to molten slag. Energy beams, antimatter torpedoes, and exotic matter weapons filled the space where humanity's ships should have been. They struck empty vacuum. The 500 had shifted into higher dimensional space, existing partially outside normal reality where Council weapons couldn't reach them. Sarah's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted through quantum entanglement networks that operated outside space-time. You're fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's weapons. We learned to fight wars that exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Nemesis materialized directly inside the Council formation, having traveled through dimensional space to bypass their entire defensive perimeter. Its weapons activated, reaching across quantum space to touch the hull of a Vorthan heavy cruiser. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, its constituent atoms returning to the quantum foam from which they had originally formed. 6,000 crew members vanished so completely that the universe itself seemed to forget they had ever been there. Impossible, Admiral Torvek whispered, staring at sensors that showed one of his ships simply disappearing from existence. Nothing is impossible, Sarah replied from speakers throughout the Council fleet. There are only things you haven't learned to do yet. The void between galaxies taught us that limitations exist only in the minds of those who accept them. More human ships materialized throughout the Council formation, each one moving through higher dimensional space to appear exactly where they chose to be. The geometry of normal space meant nothing to vessels that could exist across 17 dimensions simultaneously. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. Council ships that had never faced a serious threat found themselves outmaneuvered by enemies that could attack from directions that didn't exist in normal space. Weapons that had pacified entire star systems proved useless against foes who could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Within the first hour, the Council had lost 300 ships without destroying a single human vessel. Their formations dissolved into chaos as captains tried to fight enemies that could appear anywhere, strike from dimensions they couldn't perceive, and vanish before retaliation was possible. All ships, full retreat. Vextar commanded, watching his mighty fleet being dismantled by forces that seemed to mock the very concept of conventional warfare. Retreat where? Sarah asked, her voice now coming from inside the Eternal Dominion itself. We exist across 17 dimensions simultaneously. We can reach any point in this galaxy faster than your ships can travel between star systems. There is nowhere you can run that we cannot follow. On the bridge of the Council flagship, Vextar found himself face to face with Admiral Sarah Martinez as she materialized from dimensional space directly in front of him. Her enhanced form seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow, her presence bending reality around her in ways that hurt to look at directly. "This is impossible," Vextar repeated, his voice breaking with 5 centuries of accumulated authority crumbling around him. "Your mistake," Sarah said, her words carrying psychic overtones that resonated in dimensions the Kythera consciousness couldn't access, was believing that impossible and unprecedented were the same thing. Around them, the bridge crew of the Eternal Dominion stood frozen, their weapons useless against a being who existed primarily outside their ability to perceive or affect. "You've lost," Sarah continued. "Not just this battle, but the war itself. The moment your council chose to banish humanity rather than accept us as equals, you made this outcome inevitable." "What do you want?" Vextar asked, his voice reduced to a whisper. "What we've always wanted. Recognition. Respect. Our rightful place among galactic civilization." Sarah's form became more solid as she shifted more of her existence into normal space. "The difference is that now we don't need your permission." Through the quantum communication network, Sarah could sense the other members of the 500 completing their objectives throughout Council space. Defense stations that had protected trade routes for millennia were being disabled with surgical precision. Planetary shield generators that had never been tested in actual combat were being bypassed by weapons that could affect matter across multiple dimensions. But, most importantly, the populations of thousands of worlds were witnessing the end of the Council's unchallenged authority. The species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years were being defeated by enemies they couldn't see, using weapons they couldn't understand, in a war they couldn't win. "The terms are simple," Sarah announced, her words being broadcast to every inhabited world in Council space simultaneously. "The Galactic Council dissolves itself immediately. All military forces stand down. The 12 species that banished humanity 500 years ago submit to judgment for their crimes against galactic civilization. And if we refuse?" Admiral Torvek demanded from his own flagship, which was currently surrounded by human vessels that flickered in and out of normal space like predatory shadows. "Then you'll join the 16 civilizations that chose extinction rather than adaptation," Sarah replied simply. "The void between galaxies is vast and empty. There's always room for more wreckage." The silence that followed lasted exactly 37 seconds. Long enough for the Council leadership to process the complete reversal of their strategic situation, but not long enough for them to formulate any meaningful response. "We need time to consider your terms," Vextar said finally. Sarah's smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying than any expression of anger would have been. "Of course. You have until I finish speaking the sentence to decide whether you surrender or whether we demonstrate what happens to species that threaten humanity's survival." The Council fleet's surrender came in the form of simultaneous power downs across nearly 5,000 ships. Weapons systems went offline, shields collapsed, and Engines shut down as the combined military might of 12 civilizations acknowledged their defeat. Wise choice, Sarah said. Now we can begin discussing the future of galactic civilization under human leadership. As the remnants of the Council fleet drifted powerless in space around them, Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction that had been 500 years in the making. The species that had rejected humanity for being too dangerous had finally learned what true danger looked like. But this was only the beginning. The real work of reshaping galactic civilization would start now, as humanity took its rightful place as the dominant species in a galaxy that had spent too long under the rule of those who feared change more than they valued justice. The exile was over. The age of human supremacy had begun. 1 year after the Council's surrender, Commander Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Galactic Senate chambers on Nexus Prime, watching the transformation of galactic civilization unfold before her eyes. The chamber itself had been redesigned to accommodate the new reality of human dominance. Where once 12 thrones had sat in a circle representing equal authority among Council species, now there was a single command platform surrounded by consultation stations for the various species that had learned to accept human leadership. Elena was old enough to remember the original exile, one of the few original refugees still alive after 5 centuries of enhancement and life extension technology. She had watched humanity struggle to survive in the void between galaxies, had seen them transform into something beyond the limitations of their original nature, and now she was witnessing the culmination of that transformation. The Vorthan Collective has agreed to the new trade regulations, reported Captain Morrison, who served as humanity's liaison with their former enemies. His enhanced form flickered between dimensions as he processed information across quantum entanglement networks that spanned the entire galaxy. The Mentari Confederation is requesting permission to expand into 3 new star systems. Approved, Elena said after consulting the vast databases that tracked every aspect of galactic civilization. But remind them that colonial expansion requires environmental assessment by our xenobiology teams. It was a new galaxy under human rule. The chaotic expansion that had characterized the Council era had been replaced by carefully managed growth that considered long-term consequences rather than immediate profit. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were being rehabilitated using techniques learned in the void. Trade routes that had enriched a few powerful species at the expense of smaller ones had been reorganized to distribute prosperity more equitably. Elena, Jake Morrison's voice came through the quantum communication network. We have a situation developing in the Outer Rim territories. Elena's consciousness expanded across the dimensional networks that allowed humanity to monitor and coordinate activities throughout the galaxy. In seconds, she had access to sensor data from thousands of automated monitoring stations, intelligence reports from human representatives on distant worlds, and analytical projections based on patterns her enhanced mind could perceive across vast datasets. The hegemony worlds are testing our response times again, she observed, studying the tactical situation developing near what had once been the galaxy's lawless frontier. 3 raids against shipping lanes, coordinated to strain our patrol schedules. The hegemony was a coalition of species that had refused to accept human authority after the Council's defeat. They operated from worlds beyond the galaxy's rim, launching occasional attacks against the New Order while believing themselves safe in the vast emptiness of intergalactic space. They had clearly learned nothing from humanity's own experience with exile. Recommendations? Elena asked. I've been studying their operational patterns for months, Jake replied, his enhanced consciousness processing tactical data faster than any baseline human could comprehend. They're using the same strategies that worked against Council forces: hit and run attacks, exploitation of slow communication between distant systems, reliance on the assumption that defenders can't coordinate effectively across galactic distances. But those strategies don't work against us, Elena noted. Exactly. Our quantum communication networks operate instantaneously across any distance. Our dimensional manipulation technology allows us to deploy forces anywhere in the galaxy within hours. They're fighting yesterday's war against tomorrow's enemy. Elena made her decision with the efficiency that 5 centuries of enhancement had granted her. Signal the 5th Fleet. Begin Operation Clarity. What followed over the next 72 hours would be remembered as the moment when any remaining doubts about humanity's dominance over galactic affairs were permanently resolved. The hegemony's stronghold was a rogue planet drifting in the void between galaxies, heavily fortified and considered unreachable by any military force bound by the limitations of normal space. Its leaders had spent a year building alliances among species that resented human rule, gathering fleets and weapons that they believed could challenge the new galactic order. They made the same mistake the Council had made, assuming that human capabilities were limited by the technologies and tactics they had possessed before their exile. Captain Morrison led the assault personally, his ship Prometheus translating through higher-dimensional space to appear directly inside the hegemony's supposedly impregnable fortress. Around him, 49 other members of the 500 materialized from the quantum foam between dimensions, their enhanced forms adapting instantly to the rogue planet's hostile environment. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the hegemony's leadership found themselves standing in the ruins of their command center, surrounded by beings who had transcended the limitations of normal space-time. Jake Morrison's enhanced form shifted and flowed like liquid shadow as he addressed the survivors. "You have 3 choices," he announced, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across dimensions the hegemony species couldn't perceive. "First, you can surrender unconditionally and accept integration into the new galactic order under human authority. Second, you can retreat beyond the galaxy's edge and never return. Third, you can continue to resist and discover what happens to species that threaten human interests." The hegemony's leader, a cyborg warlord named Krex Thaner, stared at Jake with optics that had been enhanced to perceive across multiple spectrums. Even with technological augmentation, he couldn't fully process what he was seeing, a being that existed partially outside normal reality, armed with weapons that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. "You're not human anymore," Thaner whispered. "We're what humanity became when you gave us 500 years to evolve beyond your ability to contain us," Jake replied. "The galaxy tried to solve its human problem through exile. Instead, it created something infinitely more dangerous than what you originally feared. What do you want from us? Recognition that the age of chaotic expansion and territorial conflict is over. The galaxy now operates under human guidance, with human values, according to human vision of what galactic civilization should be." Jake's form became more solid as he shifted more of his existence into normal space. "Species that can adapt to this new reality will prosper. Those that can't will be removed." Within 6 months, the hegemony had dissolved. Some species accepted integration into humanity's new galactic order, contributing their unique capabilities to the collective advancement of civilization. Others chose exile to regions beyond the galaxy's edge, joining the growing population of species that preferred isolation to submission. A few chose continued resistance and learned firsthand why 16 previous civilizations had chosen extinction rather than face the judgment of a species transformed by exile in the void. Elena watched the transformation from her office on Nexus Prime, now renamed New Geneva in honor of humanity's first lost colony. Through quantum networks that span the galaxy, she could monitor the progress of reconstruction, advancement, and integration that was reshaping every aspect of interstellar civilization. The former Council species were adapting with varying degrees of success. The Kythera had embraced their new role as technical specialists, their natural engineering abilities enhanced by access to technologies humanity had developed in a void. The Vorthan had become master coordinators of interstellar commerce, their trading networks now serving the greater good rather than narrow profit margins. Others struggled more with the transition. The Zelanian Defense Force had been disbanded entirely, their warrior culture incompatible with humanity's vision of peaceful expansion. Many Zelanians had chosen exile rather than accept a galaxy without warfare, joining the growing population of displaced species beyond the rim. "Elena," came Jake's voice through the quantum network, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the deep survey teams." Elena's consciousness expanded to access the reports from humanity's most advanced exploratory forces. The deep survey teams were composed of individuals who had undergone modifications so extensive they could barely be called human anymore, capable of operating in environments that existed at the intersection of multiple realities. What have they found? Evidence of other civilizations in distant galaxies. Some appear to be in contact with Council refugees who fled after our return. They're sharing information about humanity's capabilities and discussing potential responses. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The transformation of their home galaxy was nearly complete, The universe was vast and full of species that might not accept humanity's vision of ordered civilization. Estimated timeline for contact? Between 50 and 200 years, depending on their technological capabilities and willingness to risk direct confrontation. Recommendations? Jake's response carried the strategic thinking of someone who had spent 5 centuries learning to anticipate threats from every possible direction. We continue the expansion program. By the time any external force arrives, humanity should have access to the resources and technologies of this entire galaxy. We also accelerate the evolution program. The 500 were sufficient to pacify Council species, but we may need capabilities beyond what we currently possess. Elena nodded, already formulating plans that would span centuries of galactic development. Approved. Signal the enhancement centers to begin recruiting for the next generation program. As she spoke, Elena looked out through the transparent walls of her office at the city that sprawled across Nexus Prime surface. Where once the Council's bureaucrats had governed through endless committees and territorial compromise, now human administrators coordinated the activities of billions of beings with efficiency that would have been impossible under the old system. Children of dozens of species played together in parks designed by human architects who understood the psychological needs of diverse biologies. Scientists from across the galaxy worked together in research facilities that operated according to human principles of cooperation rather than competition. Trade flowed along routes optimized for the benefit of entire populations rather than wealthy elites. It was the galaxy humanity had always envisioned, ordered, prosperous, advancing toward potentials that the Council's stagnant politics had never allowed. The exile that was meant to punish humanity's excessive ambition had instead given them the time and motivation to develop the capabilities necessary to make that ambition reality. Elena, Jake said quietly, do you ever regret what we've become? Elena considered the question carefully. The being she was now bore little resemblance to the human who had fled Council space 5 centuries ago. Her consciousness existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her body had been rebuilt to survive in environments that would instantly kill any Council species. Her memories contained the accumulated knowledge of 50 generations of humans who had refused to accept defeat. I regret that it was necessary, she replied finally. I regret that the Council couldn't accept us as equals, that they chose exile over integration, that they forced us to become something beyond their ability to control. But you don't regret what we've accomplished? Elena gestured toward the city below, where beings from across the galaxy were building a civilization based on human values of exploration, advancement, and the refusal to accept limitations. 500 years ago, they called us too dangerous for civilized space. They banished us to the void because they feared what we might become. Elena's enhanced vision tracked the construction of new research facilities, the movement of ships carrying goods and knowledge between worlds, the flow of communications across quantum networks that connected every inhabited system. They were right to fear us, but they were wrong to think that banishment would solve their problem. Through the quantum networks, Elena could sense the other members of the 500 pursuing their various missions throughout the galaxy. Some were overseeing the integration of former Council worlds into humanity's new order. Others were exploring the void between galaxies, searching for new threats and opportunities. Still others were working with scientists from across the galaxy to develop technologies that would secure humanity's dominance for millennia to come. In 50 years, maybe 100, external forces would arrive to challenge humanity's rule over this galaxy. When they did, they would find not the primitive species that had been banished 5 centuries ago, but something that had evolved beyond the limitations of baseline biology, baseline physics, and baseline imagination. The Council had given humanity 500 years to prove them wrong about the dangers of excessive ambition. Humanity had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. Now the rest of the universe would learn what happened when you gave a species that refused to accept defeat the time and motivation to transcend every limitation that had ever been imposed upon them. The age of human supremacy had only just begun.